Good morning.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Yes, good morning to everyone. Hemsha Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We are on page 1415. Yeah, 1415. So let's sum up and refresh our memories, what we've learned till here, and we can then continue properly. So the general theme is, of course, Ayin Beis interface between divine and existence, between the transcendent and the immanent, between sometimes what's called Makif and Pnimi, that which is beyond existence and with existence. And the context, what we're learning that now, is specifically not Momata Lamaila, which we learned earlier through Tefillah, where we elevate ourselves from the bottom up, through our challenges and our distress and our darkness, we go climb upward. But here it's through Torah. Torah Oyer. The process of God giving us a Torah and we drawing down from that into existence, and but thereby channeling and interfacing between the divine and existence. That's Torah Oyer. The concept of Oyer, light, is connected, as we said, to Oyer Mashpia, and there's Oyer Makabel, the Oyer that comes from the teacher that's transmitting it. The Oyer Makabel is the recipient, like the students receiving it. In the Oyer Makabel itself, and the goal is to combine the two, that the student and Makabel should receive the Oyer from the Mashpia and then also generate from within himself, but ultimately connect and bind the two. So we learned at length earlier the three different levels, so to speak, the three different examples for Oyer Makabel, which include the moonlight, which receives from the sun, the bright luminous stone that glows, and eyesight. That's the key thing. The key focus here is eyesight. So the human eye is an example, because the human eye, on one hand, is able to see things, perceive things with their own eyes. So the physical eye has limitations. We can't see in the dark on our own without the support of another light. We can only see that far. We can't see spirituality. But the Etzem Koyach Hariyah, the very power of vision, doesn't have those limitations. So the real objective here is to bridge the Etzem Koyach Hariyah, that power of vision, should allow us to see ourselves, the deepest levels of experience of godliness. That's ultimately the goal. So we've been speaking about the two types of vision. Vision that requires a light, the light of Torah. That's how neshamas in this dark world have guidance. The Torah guides them, guiding light. But then there comes a level where the neshamas elevate to a place where they're higher than Torah, and they have their vision themselves, the Etzem Koyach Hariyah, and that's why they have a power to do something beyond Torah, as we learned. That's a summary till of the last, I guess, 10, 15 pages probably. Okay. And then continue on page 1408, it started about, you said, Ke'ishin Einai, the pupil of the eye. So we're not just like angels, or the Einei Ha'eda, the Sanhedrin, that guides, but there's a level of being the pupil of God's eye, which is the Jewish people, the Jewish souls, that have that deeper connection. But you can't begin with that. You have to first begin by getting a light that shines into the eye, that allows the eye to see. But ultimately, the eye itself has the power to reach that higher level. In the language of Chassidus is that you have Chachma in Atzilus, that's vision. But then there's Chachma Stima, and all the way to Atik, the eye of Atik, that touches all the way the deepest level of vision and clarity. And that's the ultimate goal. What is that in Aveda? He explained. That's the Aveda of Mesiras Nefesh Chol Nafshecha, where we go beyond our regular capacity of loving God. It's going beyond the rational. It's the super rational. What he called from Bina, we reach to Chochmah, to Keser, to that highest level. So Mamala Kalalman is the divine within existence that we can experience through rationale and through contemplation, through logical deduction. But then there's a level of Sevav Kalalman that is beyond that, and that requires the soul being able to experience the divine, not as it relates to existence, but the divine that's beyond existence. Okay, on page 14, 13, he called that the level of who bezdinai, who, not just his bezdin, which is his court, his tribunal, his court that addresses the midas, the 7 midas, or 7 times 10, 70 Sanhedrin that guide us and they engage with existence. But we're talking now the level of like what he called the Mufla Sanhedrin, someone that's higher, like the Moshe Rabbeinu, that's higher than that. And that is the level of Neshamash and Hashem Tahiri, the Mesiris Nefesh of B'chol Nafshecha. The level of who is Nister, Lashon Nister, it's concealed. The level of Bina, which connects us all the way to Chachmas Dima, this higher states of super consciousness that are concealed. In explaining who, on page 14, 13, he began with a medrash that there's 5 times it says who in the Torah is L'Teva, and 5 times for the negative. But what does it indicate? Who indicates that it's consistent throughout, higher than Shinuyim. In Mamala Kalalman, in the divine that engages with existence, there's gradations and there's levels, and everything goes through a certain amount of diminishment. But who is Sevav Kalalman, that's higher than that. Like he explained, the level of Yechida, the level of Avram Avinu, who Avram, who draws from the higher levels all the way down into existence. Yeah, the Bina. On page 14, he went on to explain Echad Hu Avram, he draws from the Etzem. So it's similar to Moshe, but then he made him a distinction between them, similar to Moshe, because it's bringing from the higher level, from Yud Gimel Midas, the 2 levels of Havaya, Tato, Tzimtzum. Just a moment, I'm just looking at it to get the sense here. Yeah. So the Havdalah, even though there's a Havdalah, Psik Timer, a space, a line that separates the 2 of Avram, yet the line is also a connector, not just a divider. Yeah. That's on page 14. The last thing we learned. That's Avram, the connection. And yet Avram only affected things in his time. It was not for the future. In his time, he transformed only for himself and his period of time. Whereas Moshe, he says, Him shechagili b'chol se'elam, in the entire world, that they should have the power to bring down the Gili. So though Avram is such a high level, but then there's a higher level. And that's what the Medrash says, that Avram, that's the level where Avram is mamshich, the makif, into the pnimi. Okay, but it was only in his generation. However, Isla Chacha, the Medrash concludes, there's one Toiv Mekula, that the Eibishter, when you say who, Hashem Elokeinu b'chol ha'aretz mishpotav, that the Eibishter is even a higher level, because he says at the bottom of page 14, Hashem she'en kivitzer levadei akadma nitzchi eined milvadei. The Eibishter is even higher than Avram Avinu, because what he does comes from the highest level of the neshamas, that's even higher than Avram Avinu. And we concluded that this is the level. I'm going to read it inside again, because we read it pretty quickly last class that I gave before we took the break. I'll read it inside again, but I'm just summing it up, that the Medrash says that there's who. So who is a level of higher than Shinuyim? You bring down a higher transcendent energy into immanence, but in that itself, there are also levels. So we're going to learn that inside again. At the bottom, I'm going to go at the bottom of page 1414 to the top of 1415. We'll review that again. So bottom line is there are many levels of how. Mamala Kalam in itself is the level where there's the gradations and the hierarchy, level after level. Avram is higher than that, because he's Hu Avram. He's Mamshich, and he can bring down, he draws down the godliness, the transcendent godliness into existence. But it still had a limitation. I'm reading from the fifth line from the bottom of page Taf Yud Dalet. The Hamshach of Avram was only in his generation. So it's true that he brought down a higher level of Er and Gili, of divine revelation, higher than the natural experience of the divine. Now, that's what Avram did. Like we learned earlier, the 7 generations. After godliness and the divine was concealed through the sins, so Avram was the first to begin drawing it down. We learned that on the previous page. But still, it's still not the level of Matan Torah. Still not the level of a Chidush Mamish. Avram realigned existence, and he realigned it with a higher level of transcendence, but it was still in his generation, because it's still the level of every Gili. And every revelation, it's possible for there to be a pause, a cessation, a hefsek, a stop. And he gave the example, the gamba eravuka. Even when you have a very powerful torch, the light of a torch, it's not similar that when you're standing close, when you're standing distant from the torch is not as powerful as when you're standing close. So you see there that there's still shinuyim, there's still some level of shift. And the same thing with the light of the sun. If you're closer to the sun, it's hot, it's more bright and warmer than when you're more distant. The specific transcendent energies have these levels. The Medrash says, but then there's one. The Tov Makula, that's better than all those 5 levels of good, where it says who? Echad, like Avram, who Avram. Who Ian Hashem Echad. That's the Chad. This one is God, the oneness of godliness. She'en ki yetzebe, nothing compares to it. Shehu levade akadman v'nitzchi. He is the only first source. He's the only kadman, the only one that precedes everything. V'nitzchi, the eternal one. Ani rishen v'ani achre. I am the beginning and I am the end, God says. Ve'ein movade, and nothing but him. So we're not talking now in Ishtalshlos. Even Sevav Kalalman, we recall there's Mamala Kalalman, there's Sevav Kalalman, but then there's the Etzem. That's higher than Mamala and Sevav. That's the Tov that's greater than them all. Val Derech Shomer Razal, like Razal say, a Pasuk Kadeshim Tiyu, and the Pasuk Kadeshim Tiyu, Yochel Kameni. You would think you should be sanctified, the people should be sanctified, so you could think, Yochel Kameni, that you could be as sacred as God. So the Pasuk says, the next page, 14-15, Talmud Lemer, comes the verse and says, Ki Kadeshani, because I am holy. Kedushasi, my holiness, is Lamayla Mikdushaschem, is greater than your holiness. Kedushaschem ibchinas hakdusha the mitzvahs. When you say kedushaschem, your holiness is the kedusha of mitzvahs. Asher kedushana b'mitzvahsav, that we were sanctified with God's mitzvahs, which is what? That's the level of Ratzon Elyon. That's the desire of God. The Ratzon mitzvahs is God's Ratzon. And kedushasi l'mayla, I am higher than that. My holiness, God says, is higher than that. Shazel b'chinas atik b'chinas tachtena sheb'maitza b'chinas atzmos ein sof. This is higher than Ratzon. It's higher than mitzvahs. Is a level of atik, which is the lower level of the emanator, as we learned earlier. That's called atzmus ein sof. So there's atzmus ein sof atik, kedushasi, kedushaschem is the save of kalam that we draw down through mitzvahs, Ratzon Elyon, and Mamala Kalaman is a level below that, which is the energy that manifests and engages with existence. So if you recall earlier where he spoke about on page 1411, he began by saying that there's these three levels, Mamala, Seviv, and Atzmas, that's higher Seviv and Mamala. Okay. Ubelakutta Teira Ba'abir, the Shabbos Shabbosen, and Lakutta Teira, an explanation of the Maimer Shabbos Shabbosen, that's in Parsha Bahar, he says, Shazel B'chinas Ein Sof Shebetech Atik, is the Ein Sof within Atik. You may recall, we learned earlier, we spoke about the souls. He said that there's a Nitzutz Cotton on the top of page 1406, that from Eitz Chaim, he brought, there's a small spark, which is godliness, which comes from the lower level of the Creator. And that spark manifests in a small spark, in one spark that's called the creation, Nivra, which is the level of Yechida. And Yechida begins and encompasses all the four levels, Chaya, Neshama, Ruach, and Nefesh. But there's higher than Yechida. Yechida Yachid. And that's what he's referring to, the level of Chad Yachid. That's Atzmus, and that the Ein Sof Shebetech Atik. And what is it in the root? V'sharshe b'b'chinas Ein Sof Shalifnei at Tzimtzum. And its root, it's the infinite divine light before the Tzimtzum. Actually, I didn't say it in the right tune. And in the root, in Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum, which level are we talking about? This highest third level? And we talk about who? There's the level of who that's even higher. Then he says who Shmei B'Vad, so the Shalom interprets as he and his name alone. Before the world was created, there was him and his name. What are these levels? The Hu Rosh Tevis Hu Shmei Echad. Hu is three letters. Hu v'Shmei Echad Hey Vav Aleph. V'Hainu the Hu Shmei v'Shmei Hu. So when you say Hu Shmei Levad, you're talking about a level where he and his name. He is his name and his name is him. It's a total unification between the Etzem and the expression of the Etzem. The Zel B'chinas Shmoya Atzmi Akol B'Atzmusei Mamish. So now we're talking about not God's name as it already extends an oir that manifests and begins to become defined and ultimately will become the desire to create existence. We're talking about the Shmoya Atzmi, the way it's encompassed in Atzmusei Mamish. Where there, Shmoy Kadmin Kekadmusei. The name is as primordial, as original, as Kadmin means the first, meaning Kadmin Kekadmusei, just as nothing precedes God, the name is just on that same level. What we called earlier the level of Yechelis, God's capacity. This is much higher, even from Ein Sof that precedes the arising of the desire. Remember, there's a level of Ratzon where God desires existence. There's a level Kaidam Aleis Ratzon before he desires. But there's already the concept that Oyed is there, but it's only for himself. And then there's a level that's even precedes, even prior to his rising desire. When the artist desires to create art, that's already a Ratzon. Preceding that, he doesn't desire yet, but there's the possibility for it. And then there's a level, there's not even a possibility, it's beyond even possibility. Because because all these levels, whether it's the desire or preceding the desire, is all a level of Gilui of Ein Sof. The difference is the desire means it's already a revelation he's thinking about. What kind of art or kind of structure he's going to create. Is only a Gilui La'atzmei. He's only thinking about it to himself, not ready yet to desire it in a way to express it outside of himself. But the third level we're talking about here, the very core name, Mamish, that's not Gilui altogether. That's fundamentally beyond any form of expression. Helem Atzmi, not just a Helem relative to Gil that could be revealed. It is completely beyond. Like he writes about this in Hemshech Samach Vav, and this is the lower level of the emanator, not the emanation and not the creation, but of the emanator. Commission is bar le'il, like we learned earlier. And that's what the Medrash means, the chad, which is greater than that, better than all of them. So there's 5 levels of chamisha, the teva, and 5 for the negative, which we're going to learn about soon. And Islam says that Amar Abrachi b'shem Rabbanan the Taman Islam chad u'tov mekulan Hashem Elokeinu b'chol haaretz mishpater shemidus racham of la'elam. That's even higher. That's this higher level, u'tov mekulu, this level of the Etzem, of the Shmaya Atzmi, which, if you recall, is the level of where the root of the souls are. In the deepest level, that's where they're rooted ultimately, higher than Torah and mitzvahs. So mitzvahs would be the level of Ratzon, the Ratzon for mitzvahs. Then there's the Ratzon for existence, and this is even higher than that. I'm going to stop here if anyone has any questions, but I will just say one thing. This was discussed earlier on page 1407. And there he actually said that the Helam Ha'atzmi is higher than Yeridas Ha'atzmus Tachtein Shebamaitzel of Atik. So you have to say that there's 2 levels here. There's the way the Neshamas are rooted mamish in the Shmaya Atzmi, and then there's how that begins to manifest and become an entity that there can arise a desire. So there's the beyond everything. There's before there's a desire, and then there's the arousal or the stimulation of the desire. And then, of course, the allocation of the resources and so on. So that's how he explains the Medrash and Avram and so on. Okay, let me stop here if anybody wants to ask anything.
How could Shmo Atzmi be this Helam Atzmi? I thought, well, it's just totally concealed. We're never able to have. Shmo is at least something. It's a revelation of something that even though
where are you saying that? He says not that way.
Because
there's a level of shmoi that is revealed. There's a level of shmoi, who shmoi bulvad, where who shmoi and shmoi who. A higher level in shmoi. What you're describing is a lower level of shmoi. That's already the name we call him by, where there's another entity that's calling him by name. But within the Etzem, God chose. We learned earlier there's the power of Yechelis, of capacity to do something. And there's a level, because remember, in the interface, we want to have as the highest connections possible. So if there's ever a place where the Gilui gets disconnected from the Etzem, you don't have the full Etzem. So that's why all the Oyer and the Shmai, Kol Batzmuse, and there it's just like Atzmus itself. It's not Atzmus, but God, in a sense, has manifested his essence also in Shmai, which later will become in lower levels a form of expression.
So am I understanding that correctly, that Shmo Atzmi is the same as Helam Atzmi, or the same location, so to speak? Same level?
Yeah, that's what he says. Shmai Atzmi, hu b'chinas Helam Atzmi, they himself.
Wow.
He said it earlier as well. You look earlier, look on page 1407. Spoke about this quite a few times. He also spoke about it earlier, I think Aleph, let me see here. I think Aleph Reish, yeah. I discussed it at length when we learned it earlier. Yeah. This is a very big sugi in Chassidus that I've discussed at length here and before and so on. If you talk about pure Atzmus, you're talking about a reality that's completely beyond us accessing. Built to Metzias Nimtza, if you recall what that means it's an existence that's a non-existential existence. We are a Metzias Nimtza. We have no connection to built to Metzias Nimtza. The only connection we have is that God infused a piece of himself, so to speak, a piece of his personality within us. But ultimately, how do we connect to Etzem? So there are Kabbalists that say we can't. The Etzem remains beyond us. But Chassidus comes to say and tries its best to access as deep as we can. So we can't access it directly because we can't be ourselves and be God at the same time. But we can lose ourselves and get dissolved and absorbed in this higher realities. And ultimately, there's a place where it meets Etzem, or Shmoy meets Etzem. And there's the Shmoy that's Kol Be'etzem, it's encompassed completely. And then it's how it begins to express itself, extend itself, at least a Gili La'atzmei. And then ultimately a Gili L'Zulose, revealing for another. So in the analogy of the artist, can we ultimately connect with the artist himself as he is beyond being an artist? And the answer is yes, because the artist chose that it should be that way. So God is not an artist. God is beyond being an artist. He's beyond even a potential artist. And yet, he chose to manifest himself in becoming an artist. And then that artist can create infinite possibilities of art, infinite types of art. And then he chose 10 spheres, hidden spheres. And all that is expressing and connected. So it's level by level. First, you're dealing with the Etzem itself. Then the Etzem has within himself, like a soul, has the capacity to do things. It doesn't mean it's defined by that capacity, but it has the capacity. And that's how the Alter Rebbe explains how the Etzem is involved and engaged with existence, because God, the Yecheles Ha'atzmus, which we learned earlier. So it's really a very big and long and quite complex topic. The reason I'm not going to elaborate here is because I've done this at length, hours, I would say, in previous classes. And he's just summing it up, but it's referring to those deepest levels of Helam Atzmi and so on. Remember, Atzmus is not defined by Helam Atzmi either, just for the record. Helam Atzmi is already stating that it's fundamentally concealed. It means it's not expressible, it's not definable, it's not revealed in any elusive and beyond us. But Atzmus is not even that. Atzmus is beyond Helam. You can't even call him Helam Atzmi. However, Helam Atzmi is expresses more of Etzem than Gilui does, because Gilui at the end of the day is a tzir. Every Gilui has some definition. Even if you say Ein Sof Habligvul, it's also a definition. It's a definition of manifestation of Metzias Nimtza. So this gets down to, we have to go back to the classes where I explained how built the Metzias Nimtza chooses to manifest the Metzias Nimtza, which only Atzmus can obviously do. And those highest levels is where Metzias Nimtza meets built in Metzias Nimtza. That would be the way I would explain Shmoy HaKol Ba'atzmusei, where the existential existence meets non-existential existence. And then the existential existence, Shmoy, manifests Oyer, first a completely shapeless and seamless Oyer, like a field of energy. In that field of energy will begin the process of first Gili La'atzmei, that he becomes aware. Awareness itself is born. Awareness, consciousness, divine consciousness. And in divine consciousness, well, the next step will be divine consciousness as it relates to another existence, where it's still before the Tzimtzum, because he's only envisioning existence and allocating the resources. He hasn't yet begun to paint the art. Then will come the Tzimtzum after these 10 hidden spheres, and then the Kav, which is like a paintbrush, and God will actually create the existence aligned with according to his envisioning and plan before the Tzimtzum. And these are the steps that we climb. So the way I explained it, for example, so you want to get to know the artist, not just the art, and you bond with the artist, you're bonding more than just, he's not just the artist of this art. He's something completely beyond, like we learned before, Haflah. The grandeur and majesty of God is beyond the creation. It's not how God relates to existence, it's God. So it's an intimacy with a divine that's beyond existence. And then we keep going deeper and deeper. Think of a friendship with a really deep friend that you have, or even with a spouse. Where does it end, the relationship? There comes a point where Etzem, kosher be'etzem, that one essence can connect to another essence. Nafshi kshur b'nafshi. One soul connects with another soul beyond expression. There are things where we connect, we learn together, we study together, we enjoy each other, But then there comes a connection that's not definable and expressible in any limited, in any defined terms. It's just a bond. Etzem and Etzem. Sometimes the expression Yechidus with the Rebbe was Yachid, Yechida of the Chassid and Yechida of the Rebbe. Here he's going even deeper because he said it's higher than Yechida, is the Yachid. So it becomes some type of total bonding that's like literally, I mean, the closest examples you could have is the love of a child, but not talking about expressed love, the fundamental, essential love that doesn't have words, and more important, doesn't even have feelings, not when you're thinking about it or feeling it. Like I described many times, what's your left leg doing right now? You're already, once you think about it, it's already coming to Giluyim. We're talking about an Etzem that's not defined by feelings, by definitions, by expression, by sensation. It's just there. It's a state of being, of total, complete fusion. Like we talk about being in the zone, and you completely lose yourself, and you're absorbed in a reality that's not you. And yet you're not annihilated, because it's you that's being absorbed there. So this is, the difficulty in all this is in Avodah, it depends, our egos and our sense of self is so dominant and prominent, very difficult to come to this level. Because you really have to be at a place where you're ready to completely let go of everything. And most people are not ready to let go of everything. So that's why you have to find in your Avodah where you're at, your B'chol Moedecha. Where are you at? You know, what you can relate to God that relates to on your terms. Where can you go beyond your terms? B'chol nafshecha mesiras nefesh. And where can you go ultimately to the Etzem, B'chol Moedecha, like we're going to learn later, where you completely lose yourself. So I would just suggest, like I say many times, the only way is by finding in your Avodah these stages, these three levels that we've been talking about. Everybody has it differently. There's no one definition and one application of this idea. Every one of us, if you were to sit with a mashpia and work through your Avodah, you'd find that your level is very different than someone else's. And we don't need to compare notes. This is not about a competition. This is not a, you have to just be the best you can be. Some of us have our earlier stages, but just like it is with understanding things, what you understand, someone else may not yet understand. Then tomorrow, that person may understand it, and you will understand deeper things. Some of us are 10 feet up on a mountain. Some of us are 20 feet up on the mountain. So it's all relative to where you're at, where you're going, your levels of Avodah. But if you really wanted to apply this in a real Avodah way, you'd have to find real practical examples in your life. Where do you experience the divine on your terms? Where do you experience the divine on God's terms? And where do you completely get absorbed and dissolved into an experience that you don't even feel and don't even think about what's in it for me, so to speak. Like the Alter Rebbe, when he said, Ki im chalecha fatzti, mili b'shamayim, doesn't want Gan Eden, it was nothing to do with me. I don't even want to know that I'm benefiting from it. But you have to be on a real level, because most of us still think, okay, you know what? I'll give up material gain for spiritual gain. But then there's a level where there's no spiritual gain either. You're not talking about gain. You're talking about just being one. Love is not conditional. It's just total, absolute, unconditional love and unconditional surrender in a way, unconditional commitment and devotion to the highest levels. And each of us have to find where this manifests. Remember, the Rebbe Rashab is writing for all of us, also for himself. So you can imagine his level of connecting to Shmoi Kadmika Kadmusa is a lot different than mine and yours. But relatively speaking, just like Tzaddik Beini Rasha, we can find Me'ain, a taste of it in each of our lives. The same thing, these levels could also be found. And that's the only way to really ultimately relate to this. Or else it becomes just a theoretical exercise in abstract ideas and not really practical. So you have to find, where can I find in my Avodah the three, B'chol levavcha, B'chol nafsha, B'chol meidecha, or in the words Mamala Seviv and Atzmus, that's higher than Mamala and Seviv. Okay?
Beautiful. Thank you for that recap. That was really powerful. Thank you.
Yeah, and there's a lot more. I mean, honestly, there's so much to be said on this topic. I can go on and on because it's a big topic, obviously. But this is very much the central themes of Chassidus, and especially Ayin Beis. Not just here. This goes back to from the beginning of Ayin Beis, these three general stages of Mamala, Seviv, and Etzem. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so let's continue learning. He's now going to go back to the Medrash. Remember, it all began with Hu, which is higher than that, a level of Nister Seviv. We now understand something higher than Seviv, which is the Etzem, like he spoke about. But now he's going to go back to the Medrash. What did the Medrash say? The Medrash was quoted on page 1413, 2 pages back, that there are 5 times where it says Hu, the Teva, like Avram, Hu Avraham. But there are 5 times that says Hu Lera, Achashverosh, Hu Achashverosh. A Rasha from beginning to end. So he's now going to explain that level of Hu, which is not the highest level of the Eibishter, is higher than all of them, which he's going to come back to. He's going to go back now to the Medrash. V'hinei, and now Inyan Chamisha Hu L'Teva. V'Chamisha Hu L'Ra, that there are 5 Hu, which says Hu, for the good, and 5 for the negative. Ki yesh b'chinas hei Chasodim v'hei Gevuros. These correspond, al pi Chassidus, to the 5 Chasodim and 5 Gevuros, 5 virtues or kindness, 5 expressions of Chesed, and 5 severities. That's the Teva and the Ra. The Hey Neged Hey Etzbos Yad Yamin, the Hey Etzbos Yad Shmuel. And they correspond to the 5 fingers of the right arm, of the right hand, that's Chesed, and the 5 fingers of the left hand, that's Gvura. Shmuel is Gvura. Like he writes in Sefer Yetzirah, in the book of Formation, which he quoted before as well, a number of places. Eser spheres bli mispar, that the 10 spheres don't have a number. Bli ma, I'm sorry, I skipped a word. Eser spheres bli ma. The Eser spheres without substance. They don't have ma. They don't have substance. They're like abstract, amorphous. Mispar Eser Etzbos, the number of 10 fingers. Ubris yochid mechuven be'emtza. And one individual bris, covenant, or in this case he means the sexual organ, the bris, is mechuven be'emtza. Sometimes refers to teferes, but also yesod. So you have right, left, the right arm, the left arm, and you have the center, which is also where the sexual organs are, and that is the yesod of the person, and that's mechuven be'emtza. But you have also the right, the Eser Etzbos, the 10 fingers, the right hand, the left hand. V'ayin masher kosev al zeh b'pardes shad aleph perek aleph ubeis. And look at the pardes, Ayin, delve into what it says in the pardes about this. First gate, shad aleph, the first part, chapters 1 and 2. That's the Rosh Tevis perek aleph ubeis. Okay. So that's the Hey L'Tev and Hey L'Ra. Chamisha L'Tev and Chamisha L'Ra. Let's see how he explains it. I'll elaborate as we go, if we need it. V'yadua, and it's known, the Yenikas HaChetzenim M'chinas Kav HaSmel. So Yenikas HaChetzenim means the gleaning. Yenika means when you nurse. It's called Yenika. What does that mean? You don't just, let's say a child is nursing, it's a very narrow stream. Nursing is a very narrow stream. So that's why you call it Yenika. It's only getting a very narrow flow. So Yenikas HaChetzenim is a Kabbalistic term. Chassidus brings it often, that the Chetzenim, the negative energies, meaning the negative forces in this world, don't get the direct flow. Like he says in Tanya, it's like, that's why it's called Sitra Achra, like the back. It's like when you give a gift to someone that you love, you give it with all the enthusiasm, with all the passion. But if you're giving a gift to someone that you don't have, you really don't want to give it, but you have to sustain that person, whatever it may be, so you throw it over your back. That's what he brings in Tanya. Yenikas HaChetzenim means the Chetzenim need to have energy, but they can't get it from straight light. That's why you'll see maggots or worms or parasites, they thrive in dark. They get their energy, but they don't get it, because if the light was shining on them, they would all run away. Sometimes it's a shmomis yadayim tetapish, like a spider. That's in the spider webs are in the corner of the king's palace. So the example given is like the dogs that come under the table and they get the bones. So Yenikas Achetzenim, they're getting energy, but they're only getting it in a very narrow form. Yenikas Achetzenim. So he says Yenikas Achetzenim, he says, is, Chassidus explains, is from the level of Kavas Smeil. Why? It's from Kavas Smeil, from Tzimtzum, which is Smeil, which is Gevura, that diminishes the flow. The Mebchinas Chasodim, because from the level of Chesed, when you're in a state of Chesed and the flow is magnanimous and just flowing freely, like water that's flowing, Chesed that's flowing, Gam beriba ishtalshalos, even when it goes through many gradations and many levels of evolution, Hakol hu b'chinas teiv, it all remains a level of goodness and kind and teiv. Mishum de'era chesed eina mesava, because the light of love, the light of kindness, the light of positive energy doesn't get crashed, doesn't get hardened, doesn't get thickened, would be the right word. U'kamashakosah b'migdash melech, Bereshis daf Yud Zayin Amar Aleph Yu'un Sham. Now he writes in Migdash Melech Bereshis 17a, and he says to look there. And I will look there. I didn't look there now, and I'll let you know what I find. I think he brought before the Migdash Melech. Just want to see if, I think it was on page 12, 14, 10. Let me just see. He brought the Ramaz. That's not Misava. Pnimis Eir. 1 second. Just give me a moment. I just remember that he brought it. Oh, the Erachama, For some reason, I remember this Migdash Melech. Okay, I don't see it now. Okay. So what he's saying here is like this. I think we should explain this a little. I'll explain it's a practical example. And the pasuk says, what's the lashon? Shift. If you withhold the rod, you're actually withhold the rod from striking your child, it's considered to be that you're hurting your child. In other words, the power of Gevura and discipline. What's the word? Yeah, Cheshach shivtei means if you withhold shevet, the rod, seina b'noi. It's like you're hating your child. Why? Because when a child does something that needs disciplining, so to be compassionate and kind in the case of discipline is not the right thing to do, which is the basis that some in the earlier generations would use and says sometimes you have to strike. Parents or teachers would strike students. The Rebbe made it very clear that that's not acceptable today for different reasons. Because by strike someone, you have to know whether you're doing it out of Yiras Shamayim or because just you're an angry person and you don't have patience and tolerance. The point I'm making here is that the Rebbe once told somebody that when you see someone does something wrong, you have to be very careful before you show Gevura. Because once you show Gevura, and it could always lead to a lot of damage if you do it wrong. You could hurt someone. You could demoralize someone. It could only be used, Gevura, if it's going to add to chesed. If the child knows that it's coming from deep love, like he brings in Tanya, that if, let's say, a person, gets a splinter, and the parent will go and use a needle to get the splinter out, the needle hurts. But everybody knows the needle is there to get the splinter out. So you overlook the hurt. But it's only when it's that, because if you overdo it, or you do it in the wrong type of scenario, from Gevura comes Yenikas Achetzenim, A lot of damaging things can come if Gvura is used in the wrong way. Chesed, on the other hand, yes, you could spoil someone, and you shouldn't be chesed to someone who has done something wrong. But the worst thing is, you did more chesed than necessary, a little more love. Love does not create the monster that Gvura can create, because Gvura is withholding energy. Chesed is like too much water. Yes, if you water a garden and you overwater it, you could also cause some damage, but it's not going to be quite the damage that when you withhold water, like tzimtzum and Gvura and severity, there you literally can create tremendous destruction. So Chassidus explains that Yonikas HaChitzenim comes from Gvura, not from Chesed. Even though there's the concept of Yishmael, I don't know if he's going to bring it here. Sometimes Yishmael, it says, Avram sheyatzameni Yishmael, Avram's Chesed. And so-called lack of this, or too much Chesed can also spoil someone, but it's never quite like Gvura. Because Gvura could create a real damage because you're withholding energy. So basically, Yonikas HaChitzenim comes from Gvura, not from Chesed. Chesed, as he says, as it flows, even when it goes through the evolution and all the different gradations, it still doesn't get thickened, like he brings in Chaim, whereas Gvura does. So when you withhold something, in other words, basically, let's put it this way, all the challenges in life, every suffering, every form of affliction, every form of inhumanity is because of the tzimtzum. If Ein Sof was shining brightly, there would never be room for free will. There'd never be room for anyone hurting each other. But then we'd also not have independence. That's chesed. Chesed is Ein Sof. Tzimtzum, on the other hand, is concealment. There's a purpose in concealment, but concealment could also lead to all problems because you think God is not here. You don't see it. So Gvura always has that potential that can lead to something negative. Even though the father is hiding from the child in order to bring out his ingenuity, but if the child gives up looking, it can create all the problems in the world we feel we're disconnected. So too much chesed would not allow existence to be. But too much Gvura can create a situation of real destruction. And chesed can never do that. The most chesed can do is like too much sunlight, it can blind you. But when there's no sunlight at all, it will completely destroy you. Just some examples of what he's talking about here. Zeu chamishu lateva. And this is what the Medrash means, that there are 5 who that are lateva. Shem b'chinas heichsadim. They come from the heichsadim, the 5 kindness, levels of kindness. Ava makava smoil, but from the left side, Gvura, liyeshe b'chinas tzimtzum ha'er v'hashefa. Because they're tzimtzum, they're diminishment of light and the flow. So mishtalshel mezeh, from this evolves hashefa b'klipas nega. By lowering the flow, now you're allowing the negative energies to be able to glean energy from them. Because when the flow is strong, it's like, what we say is when the king, for example, is benevolent. So he's benevolent. And therefore he chooses who he's giving to, he doesn't give to. But when there's a state where the king is concealed, so that's when the thieves, so to speak, can come and steal something. Because there's no revelation, it's concealment. So that's where the shefa can go to klipas nega, which is, of course, klipas nega is not shalosh klipas atmeis, but it's still klipas nega, it's still a klipa, still a shell. Like he writes about this in Likutei Torah, in the mind Vayichol Lecha Para. That Para b'inyan par hey. Para is the words par with a hey. So there you have again the hey Gevuros that he talks about there. V'zeu chamishu l'ra, and that's the 5 times ho that's used in the negative way. Sheim b'chinas hey Gevuros l'seif hamadregas. This is the 5 Gevuros, the 5 severities at the end of the levels. The Sefer Madregas means the Klipas Nega that's gleaning the energy. And the Medrash says, where does it say who? So V'rei Shisan, the first one, who Nimrod, Shenemer by who? Who Haya? So the Medrash says, where's the first time you have a who? By Nimrod. Who was Nimrod? Was, of course, an evil king. He was the head of the generation of Aflaga. This was the generation that built the Tower of Babel. A level of separating and division. That's what he did. Pirud. Chesed unites and connects. Avram was Chesed. Nimrod was like his alter ego. He was the king and the leader of Pirud. So you have a who that he was from beginning to end. He was this level. So it's a level of who, but it's a level of who in Gevuros, in the level of Gevuros, not in the level of Chasodim. Okay, because of time, I'm going to stop here. He's going to go on now to explain the Tower of Babel, the city and the tower that they built. He's going to explain what that is and continue to explain the medrash of who l'ra. Because here we have like the Zela Umazeh. Till now, we're talking about who you're bringing down Elokur's godliness without any change, unfiltered and unchanged, unwavering, from the highest levels to the lowest levels. That's what Avram did. Avram, from Keser, Chok Mistima, all the way into existence. And now we're talking about how that is in the negative, in the Umazeh, Nimrod, the who. So he's going to explain this a bit more. But as I said, we'll stop here before the parentheses. Any questions?
Wasn't the Tower of Babel an example of tremendous achdus?
It wasn't an example of. It says when you have achdus, you have power. They were united against God. So their unity.
Yeah, I understand that, but
So we're talking about Pirud connecting to God. They were united. There's like the Nazis were united. So so that's another story. They had their unity gave them power. That's why God caused them to confuse their languages. They shouldn't have that unity. But the main essence of what they did was to separate themselves and be gods. And they wanted to be gods on their own. That's ultimate Pirud and Ischalkus against Hashem Echad. He's going to explain this in the parentheses. Nifred Melikus, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? We need to explain this, yeah. Okay. So I'm glad to be back. I hope everybody's well.
Baruch Hashem.
Okay. So we'll stop here. Beginning of the parentheses on page 1415.